I was so proud to hear from so many of my audience members that you were going to be out there protesting on October 18th, and many of you were out there protesting this weekend. The crackdown on Washington, D.C. from the Trump administration is backfiring, and I'm taking great pleasure in it. I love it. I love to see this. They had the idea of a show of force. We're going to send more than 2,000 National Guard troops to Washington, D.C., ICE agents, masked federal officers patrolling the streets. And this has become not only an example of a total PR failure, but it has really become an example of a laboratory for protest techniques that actually work, something I wrote about extensively in my book, The Echo Machine. This past weekend, the We Are All DC march drew thousands of people into the streets. They were chanting Free DC. They were chanting Resist Tyranny, anti-authoritarian messages, as well as Trump must go now. But to me, the real story is what's been happening every single day since Donald Trump's takeover, which is these decentralized, sustained, creative resistance movements. Now, in my book, I talked about really why small repeated actions will often outlast big one-time marches. And the reason why the ongoing smaller actions often have more shelf life is that they're harder to police. They can sometimes keep energy alive between major events. They can create like a constant flow of visuals and stories that social media can amplify. You do one big protest, which is great, which I'm in favor of, by the way, but you do one big protest, it'll get a little coverage beforehand, some coverage during, a little bit of coverage after, but it's basically like a really steep distribution curve, goes up quickly and comes down quickly. But here what we are seeing is that because it's one thing after another, and the people with the pots and pans, we called in Argentina, it's funny because this is the oranges of that. The origins of it are sort of in Latin America, including Argentina, the country that I'm from. Cacerolazos is what they're called down there. The banging of the pots and pans happening every night at 8 p.m. The neighborhoods are erupting with noise. And this is designed to be impossible to ignore without requiring permits and without risking mass arrests, which, of course, if everybody gets arrested, the party sort of comes to an end right away. We are seeing protesters dropping banners from bridges. I was driving around, in fact, and I saw some of these banners. Mobile billboards are being driven around Washington, D.C. Messages are being projected onto buildings. These are really high visibility, low risk activities. They bypass the traditional nodes of control from law enforcement, and it makes them really great for this sort of activism. In terms of organization, there's a lot to be learned here because we've seen residents use WhatsApp and Signal to alert neighbors. There's an ICE checkpoint here. There's an ICE checkpoint there. There are masked arrests taking place here. And this really turns every one of these instances into a potential flashpoint to publicly shame those who are carrying out these arrests. DC flags, you see in windows. You see protest graveyards that say like due process on a headstone. The implication being due process is dying here. We have seen ICE heckled and jeered by crowds. We saw J.D. Vance and Pete Hegseth heckled at Union Station in Washington, D.C. And what we are seeing is that this is working. And interestingly, after declaring war on Chicago, when Donald Trump was most recently asked, when are you going into Chicago? He said, well, we're figuring out exactly where we're going and when. He seems desperate. And instead of de-escalating, Trump seems to be doubling down and making even more threats, posting AI-generated war images of himself, renaming the Department of Defense the Department of War. He is desperate to project dominance, but he is rattled. Your activism is working. Now, I like to look at history. If history and protest dynamics are sort of a guide here, the daily actions hopefully feed into something bigger. Now, I already told you that on October 18th, we have the second iteration of the No Kings protests. Between now and then, the way I see it is every small act builds capacity. People learn that, hey, there are things going on. The networks and the safety protocols are learned and understood so people know when No King's Day comes, how can I protest effectively, but how can I protest safely and legally as well? And the more Trump starts to beat it off, for lack of a better term, the more it's actually giving it oxygen. Now, the most likely scenario, eventually, No King's October 18th, is an escalation by Donald Trump. We're going to see, I would guess, even more aggressive policing. We're going to see possible curfews put in place. We might even start hearing about preemptive arrests of the organizers, sort of like a pre-crime Minority Report type of idea. But this could get risky for Donald Trump, because if you keep protesting and you keep activating, it may turn moderate critics of what Trump is doing, who aren't necessarily dead set on getting out there. They might say, wait a second, look at all this activism going on, and look at Donald Trump using authoritarian tactics to try to stamp it out. I'm going to get out there as well. And we could see this expand to city after city after city. Chicago may well become the next front of this fight because Trump is targeting it and because the mayor of Chicago and the governor of Illinois seem very much prepared to fight against it. So we are going to cover all of it unless something changes. October 18th could be the moment that this explodes into the biggest challenge against Donald Trump's presidency. I hope that's the case, but let's also talk a little bit about what's going on in the Democratic Party.